Welcome to Fuel for Thought, the podcast where we explore the forces shaping the future of the global automotive industry. I'm your host, Guido Vildoso. Today, we're taking a closer look at a growing topic in automotive manufacturing, the anticipated shortage of dynamic random access memory, or DRAM, chips in the automotive sector. As we look ahead to 2026, automakers and suppliers are bracing for disruptions not quite as dramatic as the infamous 2021 chip crisis, but potentially even more persistent and complex. The rise of AI data centers and the prioritization of high bandwidth memory by DRAM manufacturers are creating new vulnerabilities in the automotive supply chain. Joining me today is Jeremy Bouchard, Executive Director, Supply Chain and Technology, S&P Global Mobility, who has recently written on this topic. We'll discuss what's driving the upcoming shortage, how automakers and suppliers are preparing for it, and what the future might hold for automotive electronics. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hello, Guido. Thank you very much.
So let's get started and let me jump right into it. Would you please briefly summarize the main factors driving the anticipated DRAM shortage in 2026?
So, what is happening here is that there's a lot of demand for these DRAM chips for data centers driven by the deployment or the adoption of AI in our lives, in our business life as well. And there is just not enough capacity from the few suppliers of DRAM which are supplying the data centers. There is not enough capacity to serve as well other industries. The demand for data center is growing too fast here. So because the market for data centers is quite profitable and is growing fast, the DRAM suppliers are giving the priority to this market at the expense of the other industries like industrial, mobile phones, and automotive. So that's really what's happening here. And it's really starting to hit from 26.
Great insights. And while talking to many clients, I think the natural reaction is, will this be an equivalent to 2021? So how is the shortage different from previous crises like the 2021 analog microcontroller shortage or the 2025 Nexperia incident?
There are some parallels. So the main similarity I would see is the panic buying, which in itself is creating a shortage. So we've seen that a lot in 2021 when the automotive industry started to see, oh, there is a problem. In January, they started to buy as many analog chips or microcontrollers they could get their hands on. And it was emptying the shelves. And just like during COVID with a toilet paper, this is exactly what happened. So this accelerated or amplified the shortage and caused actually a lot of damage, this panic buying. And we are seeing that happening as well already since probably July, August 2025 here. So when we are talking to DRAM suppliers, they're telling us they're getting orders completely out of sync of a real demand, and they suspect that the automotive clients are placing the same order at supplier 1 as the supplier 2 and supplier 3. So there is this inflation of the demand, which this panic buying, this toilet paper effect, as in 2021. So which seems to indicate the industry doesn't learn here. There are some very big differences, though, in the roots, in the cause of its shortage. In 2021, it was like a one-time event. It was during COVID. You remember, we were stuck at home. Everybody was looking more at TV, was using more consumer electronics, and then the demand for consumer electronics, for mobile phones, really exploded during COVID, while nobody was out buying cars. And at that time, it means for a short time, the automotive industry did not place any order, and they got out at the end of the line for these chips, which were also in demand, or from the same factories as for mobile phones, gaming platforms, etc., etc. So that was a one-time event, a big event, which had repercussions for a couple of years, but it was a one-time thing. If you're looking at the DRAM shortage now, it's different because this increasing demand here of data centers, it's not something which is slowing down. It has started really with introduction of ChatGPT just over 3 years ago, and it really continues to grow. And if you're looking at the prediction of the demand for data centers here of OpenAI, for example, it's going to continue here for the next 5 years this way. So there is it's not a one-time event here with an exit, with an end of a tunnel after 2-3 years. Once you added capacity, it's more of a long-term structural change here of the competing demand of our industry.
So if I understand you and sort of looking back at the article, this sounds like a perfect storm being triggered by the explosion in AI usage and data center growth. Would you please walk us through how AI demand is impacting DRAM allocation?
Yes, so all of the AI requests or Gen AI requests are relying on computing in data centers here, which are popping up like mushrooms really all over the world. These data centers are running on so-called GPU, so graphic processing unit. I'm sure you know NVIDIA, which is the main supplier of these GPUs. And because of this explosion of demand here, it's also the biggest market cap here ever. And so these GPUs are not just processors. If you're opening them, you'll see that there are several layers in each GPU of DRAM. And this DRAM is required basically for any processing, any compute function. The DRAM is like your short-term memory or volatile memory. It's required to store the data which is being processed. So it means with the further adoption of AI for everything in our lives here, there are more data centers coming everywhere running on GPUs. On this, because these GPUs are using several layers of DRAM, not just one layer like in an automotive memory chip, it really drives a lot of the wafer demand here, the silicon area for DRAM here at the expense of other industries.
Why are automotive applications particularly exposed to DRAM shortages?
Okay, so not all automotive functions are requiring DRAM. So you were asking before, what's the difference with what we encountered here in 21 with analog on microcontrollers? These other chips, analog microcontrollers, are used in every electronic system in a car. The DRAM, as I was mentioning before, it's needed to help or to have the processor, the compute function work. So it means it's only in the computing applications of the cars, which means in the infotainment system or the cockpit to run here your displays, to answer your questions here if you're using some voice command, and obviously as well for autonomous driving or ADAS. For all of these advanced driving function, it will require a lot of computing. So these are the two main applications. So the cockpit infotainment and the autonomy function, which are requiring DRAM today.
You highlight a two-phase crisis with price elasticity supply and anecdotal shortages in 2026 and 2027. What should automakers expect in terms of pricing and availability during this period?
Well, availability, it's really depend on how much the automotive customers are willing to pay. So what we heard when we discussed here further with the memory suppliers, it's going to be very transactional. If a DRAM, if an automotive supplier is ready to match the price which a DRAM supplier would get for a particular silicon area from another industry, from data center, for example, then the DRAM suppliers will actually provide the volume which is needed. So that's a clear message we got here from our multiple sources in the industry. So, but matching the price is a significant jump. We are seeing the price of DRAM for automotive jumping 70, 80, 100%. We heard of some OEMs which have placed orders to secure the volume at twice the price of what they were paying in 2025. So it's almost doubling or up to doubling the price here if you want to make sure you get the chip you want here.
From what you describe, it almost sounds like 2021. And I recall when, chip manufacturers were focusing primarily on what was profitable as opposed to what was volume. But let's talk beyond 2026 and 2027. After 2027, will the industry migrate away from DDR4 and LP DDR4? What challenges do automotive manufacturers as well as suppliers face in the redesigning of the cockpit, as well as autonomy ADAS systems for LPDDR5?
Yeah, you're bringing a very good point here from the article, which we didn't bring in the podcast yet, is that a further concern here for the automotive industry is that the DRAM maker have announced that they are going to stop the production of some of the older generation DRAM, so this so-called DDR4 or LPDDR4, fairly soon. They clarified a little bit later they're going to stop it for the consumer application first, as early as the first quarter of 2026. For Micron, for example, here, one of the top DRAM suppliers. They're going to continue for automotive for a couple of years, we think through the end of 2027. But it means from end of 2027, from early 2028, it doesn't matter even if you're willing to pay twice the price, chips are just not going to be produced anymore because the DRAM makers will have moved on to the next generation. So it means the industry has 2 years here to make sure they're managing a transition on that all of the systems which were initially planned for production from 2028 with these older generations, and it's a majority of the electronics for cockpit and for autonomous driving, which is actually today designed on this older generation and which will still be according to the current designs in 2028. The industry has 2 years to actually completely change this design and to move to new electronic designs using the more recent so-called LPDDR5, so the fifth generation of DRAM, which will still be in production also for automotive after 2028.
If you're talking to someone who has limited experience on this, Jeremy, and asking particularly about myself, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is normally when we think about vehicle platforms, we have a 5-year, 7-year cycle. Is 2 years sufficient for the automotive industry to make this transition? How is this part of the vehicle different from what we normally see to those of us that are more on the stamping side or vehicles rolling out the assembly line? What are the risks that we should keep in mind?
So you're really pointing the fingers on when it hurts. You're right. 2 years, it's feasible from timing, from a development point of view, but it means we expect that some system which were supposed to be working for more years will have to be redesigned or replaced with newer systems. So it's not completely clear at this stage whether the DRAM makers will still actually be contractually be obliged to continue to supply LPDDR4 behind. But from their announcements here, they're saying, no, we're not going to produce it anymore. So it sounds risky. So I think to be on the safe side here, it's really important the industry gets ready and starts to migrate systems which were still originally planned for longer term production because they would have started production, I don't know, in 24, ending production in 29, 30. These, we assume, will need to be redesigned. And it means here, it's not an easy task. You need to change not only the DRAM, but you need to change also the processor, the system on chip, which is which is running this application, because you have always this, how to say, each processor is actually tied to a particular DRAM technology. So you need to move to a newer generation processor as well. You also need to redesign your power management, electronic circuitry. So it's significant work. It's a significant investment here by the OEMs on the tier ones, on which also the processor makers need to accompany.
We talk about this transition coming into place, but there's always this balancing act between supply and demand. And looking back at 2021, I recall part of the challenge was uh, the chip manufacturing was basically placed on a handful of players. This time around, is it true that we have the top three DRAM makers holding close to 90% of supply? I mean, what are the options that automakers have to diversify and secure memory supply at this point of time?
You're absolutely right. It's actually more critical than in 2021, where on the foundry side, so on the contract manufacturing side, there was TSMC, which was a huge part of the production, but there were more designers here on more suppliers overall. Here, it's true, it's much more concentrated here. You have these three suppliers. So in order for automotive, you have Micron, the American DRAM suppliers. You've got Samsung on SK Hynix. So these are the three which are pivoting their production towards more data centers. These together are making 88%, or last year they were 88% of the total DRAM revenue. So it means they are not, they are the rest of the market, the other suppliers are fairly small, and they are not going to be able to step up and just make up for any volume deficit here from these other three suppliers here. And then the other thing to consider is that the other suppliers, the Nanya, the Winbond, etc., they are actually also eyeing the data center market. So it means they are going to still make the same choices here and probably give a priority to data center once they have the right chips to serve the data center market.
Reflecting on this, it almost sounds like we made the same mistakes as 2021, where the Titanic was eventually coming, but we chose to look the other way. Any lessons that we can learn from these two experiences for the future? Is there a possibility that this repeats itself somewhere else?
It's a very good point, and you're right. We are looking away, or when we were discussing in the team, we are saying putting like an ostrich, putting the head in the sand. We've been talking to some key stakeholders over the past 2 months about this. And we hear a lot. We are monitoring the situation. We are waiting, or we think it's bluff. So yes, there is a bit of time lost here, which could be detrimental, we think, to managing this crisis. There is also no learning from the past by looking at this panic buying, which is happening again here, and which is going to cause some disruption. This is going to be the main cause of disruption, we think, of possibly of some production of vehicle in 26. Lessons learned, which is a little bit different from 21. I think what the industry needs to be ready for is really understand that this data center demand, it's not something which is going to be just going by itself. There are a lot of headlines right now about the explosion of bursting of the AI bubble, but when we are discussing with our colleagues here at S&P Global, looking at data centers, they say yes, there will be a reduction or a correction here at some point, but the demand is still for infrastructure is still going to grow. So this competing demand of data center is going to grow. DRAM is the most visible issue today, but we are seeing as well some constraint coming possibly on the other type of memory, the flash memory, tied to this. We are also seeing that generally the capacity for the production of advanced processors, so living on 7 nanometer and more, is really stretched right now. We hear of issues as well on some of the power management chips, so some so-called discrete IGBTs in silicon. The, there are there are some issues here or some constraints as well. So DRAM is the most visible here, but this is a more comprehensive issue on which is not going to go away because this data center demand, we don't see any sign that it's really going to slow down.
Sort of piecing it together and thinking about the fact that we have all of these purposely built vehicle architectures and thinking about autonomous vehicles, is there a possibility that the shortage and challenges that we're going to have over the coming years impact some of that production? And is there any planning that we need to do from a technological standpoint on some of these autonomous applications that are coming in a not so distant future?
It's a difficult question. Indeed, we looked at the application in a car which are requiring the highest DRAM content because that would be where, in theory, you could actually make some cut, decontent as we call it, to be able to produce more vehicles with the amount of DRAM you're able to buy. The problem here is if you're looking at the main applications which really boost the DRAM density in a car, you've got in the cockpit, you've got the GenAI chatbot, so applying functions like ChatGPT in the car, but this is something which is very popular, especially if you're looking at China, which is the biggest market now. This is really a selling point. So it's really a hard decision for car makers to say, okay, we are not going to offer this GenAI chatbot because we want to save our consumption of DRAM. It will make the car less attractive to consumers. And if you're looking at it on the autonomous driving side, we looked at the impact of offering these autopilot functions, like the FSD from Tesla or the Super Cruise, Ultra Cruise from GM here. It's this as well is really impacting the demand for the ADAS system. Offering this type of function is multiplying by a factor 5 to 6 the DRAM content compared to not offering it. This is hands-free autopilot. But on the other hand, it's one of the most profitable new revenue streams for the car makers. Tesla is making a lot of money by selling the activation of its FSD features here. It's making billions of dollars here, according to our colleagues here, following the paid updates. Same with GM, which said next year they're going to double the revenue they're making with the activation of its autopilot hands-free function. So renouncing to making the car ready for it is actually preventing you from being ready to basically access to the new revenue streams here, in addition to the vehicle sales, which are actually the kind of a holy grail here of software-defined vehicles, which the industry has been dreaming of. So this is a little bit the challenge of industry. That's what makes the car sexy or with a lot of appeal here to consumer is today requiring a lot of DRAM here.
Incredible and very powerful insights. And let's come to a last and final question, even though I could go on forever. But any advice for stakeholders as they are preparing for the next wave of automotive innovation in light of these constraints? And I guess I would split it the same way you have addressed it throughout the article: short term, medium term, long term.
So short term, I would say is, don't just buy anything you can just because, okay, you get an LPDDR4 chip, you're going to buy it, because it makes no sense. It's going to cost you a lot of money it may not be what you need because each processor needs a particular spec of DRAM. So you're going to end up with a lot of chips and you're going to prevent others from building cars here. So let's not repeat this panic buying here again. Short term to mid term, take this warning here from the DRAM maker seriously. As I was mentioning before, we've seen some major automotive clients here over the last 6 weeks, still wondering if it was serious, if it was bluff from the DRAM makers to as a negotiation tactic to get better prices for next year. So no, there is definitely going to be constraints here on the supply. On if you're not committing, if you're not ready to pay the price here, you're just not going to get the chips, or you're going to be at the end of the line like in 2021. So take it seriously. That would be my midterm recommendation. Other midterm recommendation is really rapidly work on getting ready for 28. In automotive, 2 years is really, really a short time. So redesigning the electronics here, it will take a significant electronics redesign effort here, working with the suppliers as well of processors, suppliers of power management, circuitry, etc. And then an additional work, which is tedious, but we've seen some OEMs starting to do that, is trying to really understand the exposure of your suppliers here to data centers. So it's for DRAM. So we know all of the DRAM makers want to sell to data centers. So they are going to be. But it's going to be the same with analog circuitry, because there will be some power management chips which will be required as well in data center. It's going to be the same with some discrete IGBTs, for example, with even silicon carbide chips. So really understanding, are they also supplying into data centers? Is there a risk that they also prioritize the data center clients or not, on making, basically having a good relationship with these and making sure you're not basically losing your priority here. It's something we see some OEMs starting to do, and it's a good idea here.
Jeremy, thank you so much for these insights and sharing your knowledge with us. I believe that from a fuel for thought perspective, we saved the best for the last, and particularly very timely as we are navigating the DRAM landscape and the impact on automotive manufacturing. It's top of mind for many, many of our clients in the industry out there. We've explored the origins of the upcoming shortage, the strategic decisions that OEMs are going to face, and the broader implications for the future of mobility. As the industry continues to innovate and adapt, the key question remains: how will automakers balance the growing balance for advanced electronics with the realities of the global semiconductor supply? Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn at S&P Global Mobility and explore our latest insights at spglobal.com/automotive-insights. We'll be back next month with another episode. Happy holidays and have a great day.